What would you do if you saw a war hero being dragged through the snow like a criminal? For stealing a loaf of bread? Comment below. Would you step in, or would you walk away like everyone else did that day? Stay with this story, because in just a few minutes the entire courtroom, and maybe even the country, will be forced to look again. It began on a Monday morning, right before the frost could melt off the gutters in Sacramento. A man, thin, slow, bearded with silver scruff that hadn't seen clippers in years, crept behind Dawson's Market just as the delivery trucks were pulling out. He wasn't looking for trouble, just calories. 3 days, no food. His fingers, stiff lungs crackling. And that day-old loaf of sourdough behind the waste bin, it looked like survival. He didn't take more than that. No cash, no drinks, not even the newer pastries. Just that one loaf, tucked gently into his coat like something sacred. He turned to leave, but the manager had just installed new security cameras. He saw everything, stormed out like a man betrayed. "Put it down, thief," he barked. "That's property theft and you're done. I'm calling the cops." The old man, William Eugene Ashford, didn't flinch. He didn't run. He just stood there, arms slack at his sides, as if the weight of the bread was heavier than it should have been. "I just needed the strength to make it through today," he said quietly. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars screeched up. The younger cop, Officer Dillon, looked uncomfortable as he reached for the cuffs. He hesitated when he noticed the dog tag chain around the old man's neck. Were you military, sir?" William only nodded. "I used to be someone useful. Not anymore." The older officer didn't care. "Stealing is stealing. Don't matter if you're a damn general." They pushed William face down into the snow. His cheeks scraped the ice. A small trail of blood mixed with the slush. And still, no one stepped in. People watched, filmed, whispered. Probably just another fake vet. If he was real, VA wouldn't let him starve. Homeless by choice. They get more benefits than we do. Someone laughed. Another shook their head. "This is what our taxes go to, feeding these parasites." But across the lot, one person didn't look away. A woman, elderly, modest wool coat, leather gloves cracked from age. She clutched her grocery bag tighter, watching with eyes that began to tremble. She stepped closer, slowly, deliberately. Each step unsure but fueled by something deeper. She reached into her purse, not for her phone, not for pepper spray, but for a photograph. Worn, sepia-toned, the kind soldiers' wives keep for decades. In it, a Marine in full gear carried a wounded young man across a desert road while smoke curled in the distance. Her voice cracked the cold air. "That man, that's William Ashford. He carried my husband out of Najaf, while bullets flew, while the others ran. He never left him." The crowd hushed. Even the officers paused. The younger one blinked. "Ma'am, are you sure she held the photo up for everyone to see? He saved my Alan, and this is how we repay him." William didn't move. His breath-shallow face still pressed against the cold asphalt. But his eyes, they closed for just a moment, as if the sound of her voice, the name Alan, cracked through 15 years of silence. A teenager nearby, holding his phone mid-recording, whispered, "Yo, this ain't just some bum. That's a real Marine." But the damage had already been done. William was lifted into the cruiser, wrists sore beneath metal. No medals, no salute. Just another arrest report. The woman stood in the snow long after the squad car drove off, still holding that photograph. And for the first time in years, anyone had said his name out loud. The camera pans slowly to the crumpled photo in her hand. "This man saved my husband's life," she says again, voice steadier now. "You can arrest him, but the truth is coming. And when it does, the whole damn country's gonna have to apologize." "You call this man a thief. I call him the reason I'm still breathing. Before you judge a man in handcuffs, maybe ask why he's got shrapnel scars under his ribs and carries a photo instead of a wallet. If you're still here after part 1, hit subscribe. Because what happens next? No one in that courtroom or in this country was ready for it. The courtroom was nearly empty when they brought William in. No family, no flags. Just a man in an oversized orange jumpsuit with bruised wrists and tired eyes. The bailiff didn't look at him. The court stenographer barely glanced up. And behind the bench, Judge Raymond Douglas, a man known for his robotic demeanor and lightning speed rulings, opened the next file on his docket, case number 8837. Theft. 1 loaf of bread. 3rd offense. But what no one in that courtroom knew, not yet, was that both men had stood in the same sandstorm 20 years earlier. The prosecution began with robotic precision. "Your Honor, the defendant has a history of petty thefts, all non-violent, all involving food or survival items. But theft is theft. He has no fixed address, no known income, and has refused VA housing offers on record. We recommend continued detention without bail." William didn't raise his head. He sat like driftwood, worn by the waves but unbroken. The public defender assigned that morning barely knew William's name. We request leniency due to the defendant's age and presumed veteran status. There may be some VA benefits pending." Presumed Judge Douglas raised an eyebrow. "Does this man have verified military service?" A long pause. "We couldn't confirm in time, Your Honor. Records are incomplete." That word hit the judge like a gut punch. Incomplete. It echoed like gunfire in a canyon. Judge Douglas looked down at the intake photo. It was grainy, but something flickered. A shape. A scar. A look. Like a memory trying to fight its way to the surface. He leaned closer. Name, William Eugene Ashford. DOB, October 3rd, 1955. Branch USMC. Discharge 2006. Campaigns Fallujah, Mosul, Najaf. Najaf. The name slammed into the judge's chest like a sniper round. His fingers stiffened, his jaw clenched. 20 years ago. Najaf. The sand. The screaming. The blur of blood. And one voice, calm, steady, dragging him to safety, whispering, "Just keep breathing, kid. You're not dying today." He hadn't known the man's name back then. Just the grip that wouldn't let go. The broad shoulders soaked in sweat and blood. The trembling hands holding his artery closed as mortars rained behind them. And now that same man sat shackled before him. He took off his glasses slowly. The courtroom was still. "William Eugene Ashford," he read aloud. U.S. Marine Corps. 3 tours. Bronze Star. Purple Heart. Injured in Najaf during the 2004 humanitarian corridor breach. Credited with saving multiple lives, including a field medic named Raymond Douglas. The entire courtroom froze. Even the bailiff blinked and looked up. The prosecutor dropped his pen. The public defender's mouth hung open. And for the first time in the entire proceeding, William lifted his head. His eyes, red and weathered, met the judge's. There was a long pause. Then the judge stood up. Judges don't stand. Not during hearings, not for petty thefts, not for homeless men. But Raymond Douglas stood. "We're taking a recess," he said, voice cracking. 15 minutes. He left the bench, not to chambers, but straight out the courtroom door. No warning, no explanation. Chaos, whispers, reporters peeking in, phones buzzing. William sat still like stone. He didn't understand what had just happened. Or maybe he did. Maybe he'd always known the truth had a way of resurfacing when the country was finally ready to look it in the eye. Inside his office, the judge was shaking. He ripped open a locked drawer and pulled out an old manila folder labeled Najaf, unconfirmed ID. Inside, a single photograph, faded but unmistakable. A Marine dragging a medic through smoke, blood on his sleeve, fire in the background, and written on the back in black Sharpie, "Find him. I owe him everything." He picked up the phone, dialed direct. "This is Judge Raymond Douglas. I need a military records verification. Now." He paused, then added, "And get me Colonel Samuel Reyes. Tell him the ghost from Najaf is sitting in my courtroom." 15 minutes passed. William hadn't moved. But outside the courtroom, the story had already begun to leak. A local veteran who'd been in the hallway posted online, "Judge just recognized a homeless defendant as the Marine who saved his life in Iraq. This is gonna be big." Within 20 minutes, the courthouse was surrounded by reporters, local vets, and curious strangers. Back inside, the judge returned. He looked older, but also stronger, like a man who'd been carrying a weight for decades, and had just remembered who helped him survive it. "This court will postpone further proceedings," he said clearly, "pending full verification of the defendant's military record." He turned to the bailiff. "See that Mr. Ashford receives medical attention and a hot meal." Then softer, only William could hear it, "I remember now. You told me. Just keep breathing." William's face didn't change, but his eyes glistened. And for the first time in 15 years, someone said his name with dignity. In a VA archive 200 miles away, a forgotten file was being pulled. Colonel Reyes on the tarmac picked up the phone. "I'm wheels up. Do not let them process that man like a criminal. Because by morning the world would remember who William Ashford really was." And for the first time in decades, justice was on the move. I remember being dragged through the sand, bleeding out, screaming. And that man, William Ashford, wouldn't let me die. Before this day ends, the courtroom will fall silent. The judge will tremble. A colonel will fly in, and an entire nation will remember a name it had long forgotten. If this story moves you, hit subscribe, because justice is coming, and it's got a long memory. The air in the Sacramento courtroom had changed. Something unspoken swirled between the fluorescent lights and the marble floors. What had started as a petty theft case was now stirring with history, honor, and secrets long buried under bureaucratic dust. Colonel Samuel Reyes landed at McClellan Airfield by 3:47 p.m. He hadn't worn his dress blues in nearly a decade, but today wasn't about protocol. It was about redemption. He'd received the judge's call just hours earlier. The words were simple, urgent, unmistakable. "The ghost from Najaf is here." And Reyes knew instantly who the ghost was. "You don't forget the man who pulled 11 bodies, 11 lives out of a burning convoy while wounded himself." "William Ashford," he muttered. "You son of a gun. Where have you been?" Meanwhile, William sat in a small holding room behind the courtroom. Not a cell, the judge had insisted, but the atmosphere felt the same. Cold walls, one flickering light, and a meal on a tray that had long since gone cold. He hadn't touched it. He stared at his hands, the skin cracked from years in the cold. He thought of Margaret, his wife. Her voice always found him in moments like this. "You're still here, Will. That means you're not done." He hadn't cried in years, didn't even know if he could anymore. But something behind his eyes burned, not from pain, but from being seen. For the first time in 15 years, someone had called him by his full name without a smirk, a shrug, or suspicion. And that someone, Judge Raymond Douglas, was the boy medic he once thought had died in his arms. Colonel Reyes burst through the courthouse side entrance, flanked by 2 aides. Reporters shouted questions, flashbulbs went off, and a TV anchor's voice rang out. Colonel, can you confirm this man is who the judge claims he is? Reyes didn't stop walking. I'll confirm it under oath, he said. And I'll do it right now. Inside, Judge Douglas had reconvened the court without cameras. But the gallery was packed. Veterans, journalists, locals, and one elderly woman in the back, clutching a photo. Mildred Callahan. She hadn't left the building since the arrest. I owe him more than just my husband's life, she whispered to the person beside her. I owe him the truth. The bailiff announced Colonel Samuel Reyes, Fort Hamilton, New York, sworn and under oath. Reyes took the stand, posture perfect, voice unwavering. I served alongside Staff Sergeant William Eugene Ashford in Iraq, 2004. Najaf. We were part of a humanitarian corridor operation when we were ambushed by insurgents. 11 of us were pinned down in a burning convoy. Ashford, despite being injured, got every one of us out, including a young field medic who nearly bled out. That medic was Raymond Douglas. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A few reporters dropped their pens. I never knew the full story, the judge said, voice thick with emotion. I was unconscious most of the way. I just remember the voice. Just keep breathing. Over and over again. William shifted in his chair. That phrase. He had said it so many times. To men younger than him. To himself. To ghosts. Reyes continued, opening a sealed folder. This is a commendation letter written by General Patrick Hollingsworth. Yes, the same general whose son was saved during that operation. It was meant for Ashford's personnel file, but it never made it there. He passed it to the judge. Why not ask the prosecutor now, visibly unsettled? Reyes sighed. Because William Ashford disappeared after his discharge. The VA lost track. He didn't claim benefits, didn't respond to address updates. His file was never digitized. So the government forgot him, the judge whispered. No, Your Honor, Reyes said. We abandoned him. At that moment, the courtroom door opened again. A man in a charcoal suit entered, eyes searching, nervous. He walked directly to the bench and handed the judge another file. It was from the Veterans Affairs Inspector General's office. A review. A quiet investigation. A mistake. For 14 years, the judge read aloud. Staff Sergeant William Eugene Ashford has been eligible for full VA compensation, $1,482 a month medical benefits and housing support. Due to an administrative misrouting during the 2008 digital migration, his benefits were marked as closed, no response. The audience fell dead silent. William looked down at his hands again. He wasn't angry. Just tired. But Mildred Callahan wasn't quiet. She stood from her seat. That man slept in the snow while you debated file systems, she shouted. He bled for this country. And this country left him to rot like a stray dog. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, I move to... Sit down, Judge Douglas barked. Before you say something we'll both regret. He turned to William. Mr. Ashford, would you please approach the bench? William hesitated, stood slowly. The courtroom watched a man once bent by years of cold hunger and silence stand tall again. Protocol says I shouldn't be here, Douglas said quietly. But I had to be, because I owe you everything. I didn't do it for recognition, William said. I did it because that's what Marines do. The judge leaned closer. You said something to me when I was bleeding out. Just keep breathing, William replied. Those words gave me a second life, Douglas whispered. Now it's my turn to give you yours back. As the room stood in stunned silence, the judge turned to the crowd. Tomorrow morning, this man will walk into this courtroom, not as a defendant, but as a witness, a hero, a veteran who was never truly forgotten, only delayed. He saved a senator, carried a bleeding judge, and built his life around duty. But for 14 years, his government forgot his name. What happens when a nation abandons its heroes? Today, in one courtroom, justice will rise from the ashes. Don't scroll. You've come this far now. Watch how it ends. Subscribe to honor every veteran we've failed. The morning sun cut across the Sacramento courthouse like a spotlight, casting long shadows of men in uniform, journalists with shoulder rigs, and a growing line of citizens wrapped in coats and silence. The plaque outside the building still read, Superior Court of California. But that day it felt like something else, a tribunal, not just for one man's arrest, but for a country's conscience. Inside the gallery was packed veterans with medals on their chests, school children holding small flags, and aging nurses with trembling hands clasped around rosaries. The media had been barred from live broadcasting, but that didn't stop the cameras from flooding the steps. The whole city, and soon the nation, knew what was happening inside the case of Staff Sergeant William Eugene Ashford, once labeled a thief, now a national reckoning. Judge Raymond Douglas entered the chamber not as the untouchable authority of the bench, but as a man who owed his life to the very figure now seated at the defense table. William, in clean clothes provided by the court, sat quietly, his back straighter than anyone had seen it in years. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The way the courtroom hushed at his presence said it all. The session began with the reading of findings from the VA Inspector General's office. A representative took the stand, her voice trembling despite her rehearsed professionalism. Due to a clerical error during a 2008 systems migration, Staff Sergeant Ashford's file was flagged as inactive. All correspondence, including his benefit reactivation notices, were sent to a decommissioned address. No follow-up was conducted. No flag was raised. Judge Douglas leaned in. And what would his entitled compensation have been? $1,482 per month, the rep replied, plus full medical coverage for service-related conditions. Total back pay with penalties and cost of living adjustments calculates to approximately $258,000. The room gasped. But William didn't flinch. He kept his hands folded. Then, as if the moment couldn't grow heavier, the side doors opened. In walked Senator Blake, no longer the young Marine officer William once dragged through a minefield, but a silver-haired statesman, cane in one hand, eyes full of fire. Your Honor, Blake addressed, bypassing the witness stand entirely with permission. I'd like to speak not as a senator, but as a man who owes everything to Staff Sergeant Ashford. The judge nodded. Blake turned to face the gallery. This man carried me out of hell. I was unconscious, bleeding out, and he never let go. He dragged me for 2 miles under fire, whispering, "Just keep breathing." Those words became my purpose. I survived. I went to law school. I ran for office. I had a family. I'm standing here because he refused to leave me behind. A long pause. And what did we do for him? His voice cracked. We let him eat from dumpsters. We let him sleep in alleys. We let the government that owes him everything treat him like nothing. Mildred Callahan, seated behind William, began to cry. Not out of pity, but rage and recognition. So many had been forgotten. But now one of them was finally being seen. The judge cleared his throat. Colonel Reyes, please approach the bench. The colonel did, in full uniform, folder in hand. Your Honor, on behalf of the United States Marine Corps, I present an amended service record for Staff Sergeant William Eugene Ashford, now including the Medal of Commendation, the Najaf Humanitarian Operations Citation, and updated discharge with honors. He turned to William and saluted. The entire courtroom, civilians, officers, and even opposing counsel rose to their feet. One by one, a silent, unified salute to a man who had once been invisible. William didn't cry, but his lips pressed together. His throat tightened. And when he returned the salute, it was sharp, precise, like muscle memory from a life that had never truly left him. Then came the most unexpected turn. The prosecutor, a young man named Franklin Yale, who had coldly argued for William's detention just 2 days before, stood up. He looked shaken, changed. "Your Honor," he said, voice low but steady, "the state respectfully moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Ashford, with prejudice. And I personally offer an apology. I never saw the man behind the file." A murmur spread through the courtroom, but the judge didn't let it rest. "Dismissal granted," Douglas said firmly. "But this case doesn't end here. Not until we ensure that what happened to Mr. Ashford never happens to another veteran again." He turned to the VA representative. "I want a full audit. Every file flagged inactive since 2008. You have 90 days. The woman nodded, shaken. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had swelled. Hundreds now stood behind barricades. Veterans in wheelchairs, nurses from Walter Reed, high school students with handmade signs, "Ashford equals honor. No hero left behind." When William stepped outside, flanked by Colonel Reyes and Senator Blake, the silence was deafening. Then a single voice shouted, "Attention!" and in unison hundreds snapped into salute. William paused, looked out, and for the first time in over a decade, he lifted his chin. He didn't raise a fist. He didn't wave. He simply whispered, "Thank you for remembering. Thank you for..." Later that evening, back in his temporary room at Veterans Haven, William opened a small envelope. Inside was a letter. No sender name, just a single sentence. "You said to keep breathing. I did. And now because of you, others will too." He folded it gently, placed it beside his wife's photo, and closed his eyes. Not in exhaustion, but in peace. Because tomorrow he would wake up not as a burden, but as a living symbol of what this country still owes its heroes. For years he was mocked, ignored, and shoved aside. But today they stand when he enters the room. Some veterans return home to hugs and parades. Others return to silence and stay there for decades. This is how William Ashford finally came home, not to a house, but to a nation that finally opened its eyes. Don't leave now. This ending, you'll carry it with you. The following morning, the walls of Sacramento's Veterans Haven were quiet, almost reverent. Room 204, once a temporary cot assignment, now bore a small plaque, Sergeant W.E. Ashford. Inside, the man himself sat at a modest wooden desk, a cup of black coffee steaming beside a box of carefully unfolded photos. One of them, torn at the edge but still strong in meaning, showed a young Marine lifting a child into a helicopter desert wind, whipping at his collar. Another, more recent, showed him standing on the courthouse steps, surrounded by a sea of salutes. William gently pinned both images to the wall above his bed. Beside them was one more, Margaret, his wife, smiling in the sun, her hands full of lilacs. "We're home now, Maggie," he whispered. That afternoon, William gave his first public speech in over 20 years, not on a stage, not in front of Congress, but at Jefferson High School's auditorium, where he stood before a group of restless teenagers who barely knew the meaning of war, let alone the cost of coming home from it. He didn't speak long. He didn't raise his voice. But every word struck like thunder. Some of us come back with medals. Others come back with nightmares. Some of us come back to families. Others come back to a mailbox full of silence. I didn't lose hope because of war. I lost hope when I returned, and no one remembered I was even there. The room was still. Not even the teachers moved. Then one student, a tall boy with a crew cut, raised his hand. "If you could do it over again, sir, would you still have saved that judge?" William smiled. Not a big one. Just enough to show it came from someplace deep. "I didn't save him because he would become a judge. I saved him because he was a brother on the battlefield. That's what we do. That's who we are." The auditorium erupted in applause. A teacher wept silently in the corner. And William, the man they once called a parasite behind a grocery store, became a lesson that would stay in those young minds forever. Meanwhile, consequences rippled across the country. The VA office launched a full-scale audit of every benefit denial post-2008. Within months, thousands of names surfaced. Veterans who'd been dropped, ignored, overlooked. Hearings were opened. Officials stepped down. A $1.2 billion emergency relief package was approved to restore and compensate affected veterans. The prosecutor, Franklin Yale, submitted a letter of resignation. He later appeared on a local talk show and admitted, "I looked at him like a statistic, like a file number. And that blindness, it's the most dangerous kind. I won't ever make that mistake again." Dawson's Market. The site of William's arrest issued a formal apology, but their store saw months of protest and boycott. Eventually, the owner, the same man who once shouted, "That's not a veteran, that's a parasite," stepped forward in a public event and read a statement, voice shaking. "I didn't just misjudge a man. I misjudged what honor looks like when it isn't dressed in a uniform anymore." 6 months later, outside the same courthouse where it all began, a new plaque was unveiled. Bronze. Weathered. Strong like the man it honored. It read, "For the invisible heroes, for every veteran who came home and kept waiting to be seen. In honor of Staff Sergeant William Eugene Ashford, USMC." Next to it stood a sculpture William captured mid-motion, carrying a wounded soldier, Judge Douglas, over his shoulder. One hand clinging to a dog tag chain, the other holding a rifle. Behind them, a tattered American flag, sculpted to look like it's still waving. That evening, William joined Judge Douglas for Sunday dinner at the judge's home. It had become a quiet tradition. No cameras, no press, just family and memory. The judge's grandson, 9-year-old Teddy, climbed onto William's lap with a hand-drawn picture, a man in a Marine uniform giving bread to a hungry boy. "Is that me?" William chuckled. "That's a hero," Teddy said. "Grandpa said you were the reason he got to be a daddy." William swallowed hard. "Your grandpa became a great man all on his own kid. I just made sure he had the chance." The table fell silent for a moment. Then the judge raised his glass. "To those who never asked to be remembered, and to the ones who never stopped remembering them." On Veterans Day, William stood at Fort Hamilton in full dress uniform, the same uniform he'd stored in a weatherproof bag under a bridge for years. The crowd before him stretched past the flagpoles. Veterans, young and old, active duty, Gold Star families, students, teachers, mothers with folded letters in their purses. When asked to say a few words, William kept it brief. "I once served this country in the desert. Then I served it again in silence on the streets. And now the country has chosen to serve me back." He paused, gaze steady. Kindness is never too late. It just needs someone patient enough to wait for it. The camera pulls back from the man, from the crowd, from the past. A once-forgotten veteran now stands not for himself, but for thousands who still sleep in silence. Have you ever misjudged someone by their appearance? Share their story below. Let their name be heard. Because somewhere out there, another William Ashford is waiting to be remembered. And if you're watching this and feel invisible, just keep breathing. Your story isn't over.